So yes, this is in our Secret Powers series, all right? So uh, I'm going to I have a quiz, a kind of quiz for you today. Not exactly a quiz. Well, I guess it is. Okay. So I hope your minds are all sharp. So Secret Powers of Meditation, this is our seventh topic. So we had the intro, but then we have seven topics so far. The power of perspective. And this has really had me thinking. I've been doing quite a bit of research and reading this week about this, and I realized that I need several months to explore this, probably years. So I'm going to try and do at least some kind of justice to this. I've found it fascinating. And yeah, I want to begin with this. So, of course, if you look at this image, you'll probably quickly notice that it can be seen as two different things. So, what do you see? Do you just want to type it in the chat quickly? What did you see first? Well, maybe you haven't. I mean, it's unusual. You might not see that there are two different things there. But want you to type in the chat. What did you see first? Or you can use your microphone. It's a small group. And then what did you see second? Okay, first the vase and then the two faces, right? Vase, second the two faces. Yeah, I think that's pretty natural because, of course, the vase is in bright color and it grabs your attention. But then you see, oh, you saw the two faces first. Very interesting. I don't know what that means, but that's pretty cool. So often what we miss, the reason we sometimes miss things is we don't look at the spaces, the gaps, or what's not there. There's a famous song. It says the space between the notes kind of defines the music. So it's the periods of silence that actually define the music. So you saw okay, one third of you Anushila, you saw the vase first, which in America I believe they call a vase or a vase or something. I don't understand this language. Okay. Yeah. So sometimes things are not what they appear to be, or they have multiple forms depending on how we look at them. I really love this. Again, let's a little education from the very young. Well, of course, Mr. Waterson was not young, but if people sat outside and looked at the stars each night, I bet they'd live a lot differently. How so? Well, when you look into infinity, you realize that there are more important things than what people do all day. This kind of sums up pretty much what I wanted to say today. I think we can end here just about with the wisdom of Calvin and Hobbes. If you don't know these characters, this is my favorite cartoon strip series. The author, what's his first name? Some of you probably know. Waterson is his second name. He finished. He stopped writing it, which was a very wise decision because he'd written a lot of them. There's like volumes. I've got 5 volumes of these. But he decided that if he continued, it would just be repetitious, or it wouldn't be fresh. So he, despite being offered vast amounts of money, he refused to continue it. Said, "Okay, I've done it. It's done." So it contains a lot of wonderful wisdom through the eyes of this little boy and his tiger. And I highly recommend The Wisdom of Calvin and Hobbes. I totally relate to Calvin as kind of me as a kid. Any other Calvin and Hobbes fans out there? Bill Watterson, thank you. Sadama, I guess you're a fan. I'm pretty sure you are a bit. We've talked about um, Calvin and Hobbes. Okay. So according to the philosophy of Tantra, there are 3 variables in reality, or 3 universal variables, which are time, place, and person. And if you read or listen to, well, they're not on audio usually, but if you read the discourses of Sri Sri Anandamurti or P.R. Saka, the founder of Anandamaga, writing about yoga philosophy, he often refers to this in terms, the variations according to time, place, and person. So every situation is either, you can have the same time and the same place and a different person, or you can have any combination of these. But if you have this, the three are all the same, there can only be one of them. So there can only be one person in one place at one time, right? So these are the three variables, and I'll give you a little illustration of what can happen when one of them shifts. So here's a person is dying, right? So it's the same person. They're in the same place, but it's a different time because they're at the end of their life and they're looking back. And these are the five, apparently, according to the Guardian News, which is a very prestigious publication, these apparently are the main regrets of the dying. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. There's so many novels about this. People who've tried, live their lives trying to live up to their parents' expectation or somebody else's expectation, and it doesn't work. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. It's a common one. I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. So there's a lot of regrets here, right? Well, it is regrets, okay. I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. I wish I'd let myself be happier, right? So it's kind of sad thinking that, a lot of people feel this at the end of their lives. So, of course, the idea is not to be sad. The idea is to make sure that we don't feel like that when that time comes. But this is perspective of time, right? This is what happens. We can, if we get the perspective of time at the end of your life, it's all going away very shortly. You can look back and you have the perspective of time. It's a very powerful, unique position, and you often get insights if you have this big picture perspective of time. When you're a little kid, you don't think about this stuff, right? Even when you're in the middle of life, you're immersed in working too hard and trying to live up to others' expectations and not expressing your feelings because you're afraid to, etc. Right? You're in the middle of it. But when you have the perspective and you can look back and you think, oh, and you realize something. Okay, here the variable is person. So you've got same place, same time, but two different people with different perspectives. And they disagree. And neither are wrong, but they have different perspectives. Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. Marcus Aurelius, very wise Roman general, I believe. Lots of people seem to live by his kind of code or philosophy. I've read some of it. Some of it's really good. So here you got the variation is the person, all right? So the first one was the variation in time. Second one, the variation is the actually it's the place. Sorry, I want to go back. I messed up there. This is not the difference between the people. This is the difference between the place. They're where they are located in relation to the object they're describing. So this is variation in place or position. And this is a variation in, well, you could say it's also a variation in place, but it's designed to illustrate attitude. So it's how you look at things, all right? Some people always see the miserable, boring cliff face, and some people choose to look the other way and see, the sunrise and the mountains in the distance. So it's really a variation in the type of person or your view on life, the way you see the world. Now, I've got some questions for you. I've got a bunch of pictures following up. And with each one, I want you to say whether you think the main variable here is time, place, or person. Okay? So I want you to get this idea. So let's try the first one. Okay, you're familiar with the Heimlich maneuver when somebody gets something stuck in their throat? So this is a particular perspective on that, but I want you to give your opinion of which is the variable. Is it the time or the place or the person? And you can type that in the chat. Time, place, or person. Any thoughts? I hope you're too busy laughing to type. Is that the cause of your silence? I love this one. And we have some brilliant Okay, you think maybe all three. You don't understand the question. It'll come. It'll come. We'll do more of these until you kind of get it. And some of them are not that clear. Yeah, it's open to interpretation, but I would tend to think that this joke rides on switching the person. Okay, the time kind of doesn't matter, the place doesn't matter, but if somebody has something stuck in their throat, typically, somebody saves them, hopefully. But here, they've put this person, Darth Vader, who's not known for his healing powers, on quite the reverse, in fact. And of course, what he does with his hand of doom is, he moves his hand and he strangles people. So it's like it's a different person. So I would suggest that the variable that makes it funny is switching the person. You might get the idea. Maybe. Let's see. There's some of them more obvious. Okay, this one I think is really clear. What's the variable? I know a kid like this. Like, yeah, this boy, I know he lives nearby. He knew everything about dinosaurs when he was like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I mean, he's unbelievable. He was like a boy, of course. It's typically a boy. All right, time. Yes, it's super obvious. This one's more obvious. The first one was probably not a very good example. Probably more of an example about how I can't resist feeding very silly pictures to you guys. Okay, so this one's very, very clear, right? The variable, same person, okay, your life, um, same kind of subject matter. You can say the place, the place is knowing about dinosaurs, but what changes over time is what matters. So let's try another one. Okay, what's the variable? Yeah, this one's again super obvious. Yeah, of course it's a different person. See, you're getting the idea. So it's the same place, right? They're both in the park at the same time, but the variable is the individual, and they have different perspectives. And one of them literally cannot see what's going on because their mind is so cluttered because they're a human being. And the dog has a more simple perspective, uh, and an uncomplicated perspective on the world. So there's a lot you can understand from this. Okay, here's another one. And this one I'm not sure how clear it is, but I thought it was good. It's another one of these ones I couldn't resist. Sorry. I think I have an opinion on this at least. I'm not sure if I would put money on it being correct, but I think I have an opinion on it. Um, I'm prepared to say that I disagree with everybody so far. Sadama, you're putting two. I guess I didn't. There weren't any rules. I'm going to tell you my personal opinion in a moment, which is that I disagree with you. No, the person's the same because the idea is that it was Jesus then, right? And it's Jesus now. So that's the whole point of what would Jesus have done. So the person is consistent. The place is the same. It's a bank, okay, a bunch of bankers, but time has changed. So that's my whether or not that's a reasonable interpretation. There really are no rules here. I am making this up as I go along. Um, this one is less clear. Okay, fair enough. I am very fond of this one. I remember driving past this sign in 2010 and 2011, and there was this whole cult who had been told by some supposed prophet that the world's going to end, and they'd all sold some guy like sold his house and gone and lived in, I don't know, some survivalist thing. Or it was really a mess. And, you know, it was, these ads cost a lot of money, and they were all along the freeway on 880, if you know, live near where I do, a big major freeway, sort of 8 lane high freeway. And everyone, all these cult members, of course, uh, I love this one. Okay, yeah, this one's an obvious one, right? And I think it's a lot of fun. I have lived through, you know, if this is the Judgment Day, end of the world, I've lived through the end of the world at least 7 times, I think. And I've concluded that it's good for your health. Uh, Living through it. Well, you know, the end of the world's good for your health. I think that would be a good slogan. Um, okay, time is the variable, right? Because we have the perspective of time on this one, and it makes it laughable and stupid. All right, this one I'm actually not sure. Okay, what is this one? I'm really curious myself. Could be more than one. It's something to do with perspective, right? You can chime in and argue if you like. Yeah, place, I think so, because it's a matter of scale. Yeah, it's place. Okay, that's probably the only right answer. Anyway, I just thought it was something to do with perspective. Here's another one. I don't know. I'm not actually sure what this means. I mean, somebody's very clever, I guess, is the correct answer. The person who drew this is very clever. But I want to hear what you guys think. Okay, it's a different place. Yeah, it's kind of, that's what occurred to me somehow. What's the variable? I'm not sure. Yeah, everyone thinks it's place. Okay, oh, no, hang on. Yeah, okay. Everyone seems to agree that this actually means something. Good. Are you learning something? I don't know. Okay, this one I really like. You may have seen it before. This has been a popular meme. So of course this goes around every Thanksgiving. Does the rounds of social media. Yeah, well, I'd say it's definitely person. Well, the time is important, but I think it's the thing that makes a joke work. Glad you like it, Charity. The thing that makes it work is that you're shifting the perspective, not in time. The time is constant. So what is there to be thankful about on Thanksgiving? That's the kind of one time. Place is not that relevant, but the perspective is from, whether you're a human or a turkey, and so it's a change in person, I think, that makes it work. That would be my argument. All right, and this is another of my favorites. One of my other favorite cartoonists, Gary Larson. He does get very dark sometimes, but this is one of his lighter. Uh, and a lot of humor, as you'll be seeing, a lot of humor is by switching or putting someone there with a very different perspective. So yoo-hoo, yoo-hoo, I think I'm getting a blister. I think this is marvelous. This is one of my favorite Gary Larson pictures. Is it all three? Again, I would suggest. Well, I'll let a few more of you take a stab at it. We could have a big debate about this, about all of these, but that's not my purpose. Um, yeah, I would tend to agree, Sudama, that it's like one person has a different perspective, right? They're all in the same place, right? They're all in the same time, but one of them has a different perspective, perhaps on life. And all the rest of them looking real miserable, and this guy's chirpy and he's got a little complaint to make to the guy with the lash. So I thought that was rich. I think this might be the last one. Oh no, this is a very touching one, of course. Yes, Yes, and I don't even know, I'm not even sure what I think about this one, but I just think it's very powerful. I want to get your perspective on this one to help me get it. Time, yeah, I think that's probably right. Interesting, yeah, because from the very young and the very old, they have a perspective, a different perspective on money than everybody in between, and they share it. Isn't that interesting? I reckon that's really cool. Time for sure, and person. Yeah, I would say that's actually correct because it's the perspective of these, these little kids, the grandchildren perhaps, and the grandmother is that, you know, this is what's important. Um, and of course, they have very different time perspectives. So that's cool. I really like that one. Oh, this I had to finish on a crazy one. That's right. So of course, this is playing on the the idea we're all everybody's kind of the same inside, or but except for the pirate. Oh God, I don't know who's responsible for this, but man, they got a twisted mind. I love it. Okay, I think we're just about there. Okay, I think that was the last one. Okay, so I mean I did all of that because I love all those kind of crazy humor things and the sentimental ones, but um, also just to really get you thinking that there are different there's always there's more than one way of seeing things. Pretty much anything, there's more than one way of seeing it, and one it doesn't necessarily mean that your view is reality or truth. We can explore that a little further with we can start looking at a few illusions and um, this is a great one. You've got a quiz here, and we have a poll. I'm going to launch a poll, and in this poll, I'm going to ask you a very simple question: which orange dot is larger? And you can answer the poll. There are three choices: the one on the left, the one on the right, or they're both the same size. And nobody cheating, getting out rulers or things to measure with. You're only allowed to do this by looking at it visually and seeing what you think. Okay. So which of the orange dots is larger? And I'm waiting for you to vote in the poll. You should be able to get a little thing prompting you to vote in the poll. Is that happening? None of you are voting. Don't you want to exercise your democratic rights? Okay, let me see what's happening. No, no tips. Come on, some of you got even to vote. You fought for your rights, and this is all that you're going to do with it. I don't have a single vote yet, or maybe I do. No, zero have voted. I'm not allowed to vote. It's not fair. And can you vote? Is it a problem? You voted. Ah, you voted, and then, oh, you know what? I think I have to click on the thing to end the poll. Oh, yeah, you both of you voted. Okay, it's not showing up. All right. I'm going to end the poll in like 5 seconds. So you've got 5 seconds. Five, four, three, two, one. And, huh? It didn't work. I don't know how you voted. That's weird. Okay, this illustrates a very important point, which is that I don't have a clue how to run polls on um, Zoom or then share results. My results were like zero. Why is that? There's something wrong. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing that naughty poll. You all voted. Bye bye poll. Go away. I want to know how you voted. Please do it in the chat. I'm abandoning polls for the duration of this today. So please tell me who thought the. Let me go back. Where's our picture gone? There we are. How many of you thought the one on the left? You can see the results. where do I get to see the results? Can you tell me the results? 80% said it was the same. Okay, and thanks, Anna Sheila. How come everyone sees the results but me? 20% said the one on the right is larger. Okay, that of course is an illusion. They are actually exactly the same size. And it's a very compelling illusion. I mean, looking at it now, knowing this, it still looks bigger to me. It's crazy. So perspective, what does this tell us? Perspective is very relative. It's very much influenced by what we already know, we compare things. We're habituated comparing things to things that are next to them, or look similar, and look, it really almost forces us to think the one on the right is bigger, but it's not. There you go. And now we're going to see another one. This one's I'm going the wrong way. This is cool. Watch this. This makes me crazy. I can't. Okay. Now you get to see somehow how it works, but I still can't figure it out. I'd have to really twist my brain. And this is even more crazy. Okay. Apparently you can actually buy one of these. It's a toy. They call them science toys. They're from Japan, and the guy's got a whole lot of them. This is the best one. So there you go. Weirdness, illusions. We can be deceived into thinking something is something that it's not in many ways, and this happens perhaps more than we realize. There's another good one, and I've got a poll here, but I'm not venturing into that world of polls. I'm a little averse to polls at this moment, but I have a simple question for you. If you're driving along the road, this is a real road in Iceland. It's a real thing. It's not a drawing or anything. But if you're driving along this road in Iceland and you come to this, would you definitely stop? So I want you to answer in the chat. Would you definitely stop? Right, because it looks like you're going to crunch your car if you drive into it, right? And that is exactly what you're supposed to think. It was a deliberate campaign by the Icelandic government to stop people, to force people to induce people to stop at pedestrian crossings because they didn't want human beings to be run over by cars. But of course, the road is completely flat. It is an optical illusion. Seen from the angle of a driver approaching it, it looks like no way I'm going to drive through that. Now that is creative use of illusion. We need that. Exactly. Isn't it great? I love it. Those Icelanders. Oh, here we got it. Now here's a perspective. Evolution does not optimize for perception of reality. Evolution optimizes or selects our brains to perceive mental symbols optimized for fitness or reproduction. Well, I presume that is certainly a the major factor, or survival, etc. Yeah, that's all going on. That's right. Yeah, I mean, evolution would presumably, for a community, would select for being fooled by this particular illusion, because this will save lives in the community. I if that's probably good for our individual genes, health of the community, fewer people being run over. I like it. All right. And, sometimes we just choose to look the other way or ignore things and carry on. Isn't it amazing? This is a little bit too real for me right now. I believe this photo was taken in California. Not recently, it's actually from some time ago. But good news is nobody died. There's actually a river in between there somewhere, but the picture is nevertheless pretty stunning. I love this one. Talking of delusion, this is more going into the realm of delusion. Okay, we've seen a bunch of illusions, but we also suffer from delusional perspectives. Um, how many of you, well, I'm not going to ask you to confess anything too personal, but I just want you to reflect. How many of you, perhaps when you were a teenager, fell in love and you thought that this person you're in love with is like perfect, and like, and if they didn't love you back, it's like the end of the world. Maybe you thought about suicide and all teenage drama. Now, I know I suffered from that, and it's so crazy. And I had this wonderful teacher, and she was like a mentor to us. And I remember when I was in the midst of my anguish over this young lady who apparently was not interested in me. How could that be? I I was telling her about how tragic it was, and I imagine she was probably trying not to laugh. No, she was sympathetic, but she told me she was our English teacher, so she quoted to me from Shakespeare, and she said, "Men have died from time to night to time, and worms have eaten them, but not for love." So I mean, I remember that, and that was like 50 years ago or 40 years ago or something. I still remember her telling me that, and I may have taken some comfort from it. Thank you, Shakespeare. And I'm sad to say I cannot remember my teacher's name, but she was incredible. But she was trying to give me a perspective, right? And she, of course, had the perspective of having been a teenager. She's got, 100 students like me, all of whom are having at some point similar issues, which have very little to do with reality, uh, but we have no perspective. We have a very distorted idea of what is important, what is real, and fortunately, hopefully, we live to grow out of it. So, yeah, we sometimes get perspective from poets and teachers. That can be very, very helpful. Unconscious bias is another kind of distorted perspective which can create a lot of problems, and it's universal. I would say that only the fully enlightened being, and I'm not convinced that there is a single one on earth at this moment, uh, is free of unconscious bias. That I'm sure of. Now, this was a film. Well, it was a book, and it became a film back in the '60s, I think. Excuse me, called Black Like Me by this man, John Howard Griffin. And this is his true story. He's a white man in America, in the South, and he colored himself black and made himself look like a black person. And he related his experience, and it was horrific. And it was real. He realized what it's actually like to be a black man in Alabama in 1967 or whenever it was, and wrote this amazing book afterwards, which blew people's minds because he was a white man and he was able to get to actually experience the perspective of a black man living in a very racist, discriminatory society. And he I don't. It was a long time ago. I read the story, but he really suffered quite a lot. His life was in danger at some point, I think. So this is a really amazing way of him individually doing that. Actually, I was involved in a project. I was working as a consultant for Google, which was kind of exciting. And they have a program for helping to train a group of the content reviewers for YouTube, because YouTube belongs to Google. You've got about 8,000, about more than 10,000 people around the world. Their job is to review content and decide whether it's appropriate or not, or whether it fits Google's rules about racism, hate speech, obscenity, violence, and all the whole set of them. There's like 13 different parameters. And they've got very complex rules and policies, which are a mixture of the company culture, the law, societal norms, and what's acceptable and what's not. And it gets very complicated because in the online world, there are no countries, but in the offline world, there are, and they all have different laws and social norms and cultures. So it's a very complex thing. And the purpose of this program that I helped to create, which they're testing now, I believe, is to create a series of meditative exercises to reduce unconscious bias. We did that, and during the research, my project manager and I, we looked at different ways that psychologists and researchers are trying to figure out how to reduce unconscious bias, things like racism and, you know, sexism, obviously, and hatred of people from different types of religions and so forth. These were some of the big issues that they're trying to address. And one of the organizations, one of the psychology groups researching this, had developed a really amazing technology using virtual reality. And you can go into this virtual reality suit kind of thing, and you can see yourself, but you can choose your race and your features, your gender. I could be a Chinese woman, and then I would be in the virtual reality world. That would be me, and you feel like you're actually there. It's not like you're watching a movie. You're actually immersed in it. I didn't actually get to try this technology, but I've used VR technology, and it's really immersive. It's like you really feel you're there in that world. And in this version of it, they could change the kind of person they are. And they use it to entrain people and try and help them to really see things from another person's perspective. And so that they feel like they can see like their hands, I have the hands of a Chinese person or whatever, and they use this in their training, which I thought was pretty cool. So this is another whole field that is within this sort of the power of perspective. How we see the world, and we're going to go into an area that this is a very interesting area. So of course. We know which one is real and which one is made up by humans and is used to perhaps divide people rather than unite them. And there's a famous saying, we'll come across it a little bit later, but I want to spring it on you now. There was a great astronomer and science fiction writer. I used to read his books when I was young. I read lots of science fiction books when I was a boy, and his name is Fred Hoyle. He's passed away now. His brother was also a great science fiction writer, I think. But he said something. So this is before the moon landing. I was reading his books in the early 1960s. And he said something like, when we get the first photograph of the world seen from space, that will change the world. That will have such an impact on humanity that it'll really change the world. And many people have reflected on that idea since, and there's a lot of truth in it. We think of ourselves now as a global civilization in ways that weren't even conceivable in the 1950s. Nationalism then was normal, very normal. I mean, we kind of just came out of the Second World War, right? But this perspective of seeing the world as this pearl floating in space really changes the way that we feel about all the other living things living on this same world. And I want to, before we go into that though, very important, this is the main purpose of this whole exercise, is to understand who is the real hero of Lord of the Rings. So I'm going to give you 4 options, and you might have we're going to have a look. Okay, we have, this is not all of them, but let's think. Okay, so maybe Frodo. No, maybe you don't know the story, but most people, at least in this part of the world, know it pretty well. Frodo, Gandalf, Aragorn, Sam, maybe somebody else. Who do you think was the main, real hero of Lord of the Rings? I want you to put. This is a hard choice. I want to put your guess, your favorite, because it really depends. It wasn't clear. It wasn't clear. There are alternative perspectives on this. So we have a Gandalf lover. Oh, Sudama, you contrary fellow. We've talked about this before. And do we have others? You're not familiar with it, Anashila. Okay. I highly recommend it. This was my Bible. This book was effectively my Bible growing up. Harry, you're not familiar with it. That's I'm surprised. It's the most read book in the world after the Christian Bible, actually. It's like, half a billion people have read this or something, but clearly two of them are not present. I envy you because you have the possibility of reading it for the first time, which was breathtaking. Okay, so it kind of doesn't matter because the point I'll tell you in a minute. Any others? Have you got any other views on this? Okay, I'll run through them with you. So that just keep you engaged. So Frodo was this little fellow. He carries this evil ring of power, and he takes it to the mountain of fire, and he's supposed to throw it in the fire so it will be destroyed, and the Dark Lord, who is the Lord of the Rings, will be destroyed. Right, and it's like an impossible task. And Gandalf was the great wizard who's helping him. Aragorn was this king, the rightful king, also a great hero. And Sam was his friend who supported him all the way, and he couldn't have done it without him, right? So some people feel that Sam was the real hero because without him, Frodo could not have completed the journey. But the great twist in the story is this, and Sudama, of course, referred to it. There is this figure who was a relative innocent, a small character, but he had the ring for many years and it completely corrupted his mind. And he became this twisted, he murdered people. Seemed very corrupt and evil. But in the end, he was the one who destroyed the ring by accident. He seized it because he lusted after it. He bit Frodo's finger off with the ring on it. And then he was so delighted, he was dancing in joy that he had the ring again, and he fell into the fire and died and ruined and destroyed the ring. So actually, you could argue that Gollum, whom everybody hates, was the real hero. And I love that because it's not like, and there's a whole story around that. But I just thought this was a fun piece, especially if you're familiar with the story. But even if you're not, the apparent this villain, he wasn't really the main villain, but he was a minor villain. But it turned out that he was the one that saved the world. And this is very philosophical. I mean, he's really the author is really saying, look, everybody's life has value, even if we don't know what it will be. Nobody knows the future or what part somebody will play. And he uses this to argue that it's an argument against capital punishment in the book. It's very subtle, but he's actually using this as an argument against capital punishment. He says we should, and I thought that was really cool perspective. Okay, there he is, poor old Gollum. Not a very flattering picture. These are from the movies, of course. Okay, and then we go on from Gollum. Are we supposed to? Here we go. I'm going to tell you the whole story there. Worldviews. Okay, that worldview means the way you look at the world, or what you view as important, what you feel is valuable. It's underlying your worldview underlies your values, what you consider important, valuable, worthy of your time and attention, and that you should really devote yourself to, maybe. So there are different worldviews, but you could say they can broadly fall into different categories, and here are two or three categories. So one is the worldview of materialism. See, the belief or the idea that the world is made of matter, that everything, that our consciousness, our awareness, our feelings are a product of biochemical or electrical processes. This is known as materialism. And the kind of implication of that is that only matter matters. Now, it's not to say that everyone who thinks that the world is just made of matter is a materialist. It's not the same thing. But the attitude that only matter matters is materialism. And it underlies, capitalism, thinking money is important. It's very well described in one of the tenets of the Ananda village, which is a spiritual community in near Grass Valley in Northern California. And they have three tenets that they live by, or principles that they live by. which helps. They explained to us when I visited there that this is how our community has been able to thrive and flourish and continue and survive conflict, because there's always conflict in communities, and spiritual communities, small communities. This is maybe 200 people, maybe, I don't know, 200 or 300 people there. It's difficult to maintain. And their first tenet is that people matter more than things. So it's an anti-materialist principle, and it's helped them flourish as a community. And it really is a beautiful place, and there are really great people there. Now, the opposite extreme of materialism is this idea that the world is an illusion. And this is a philosophy or worldview that's been presented as in forms of spirituality, various forms of Hinduism, Vedanta, and especially coming from the East, the idea that the world is not real and only the spiritual world is important. Even in Christianity, you have versions of this. They're not saying the world is not real, but the world is basically tainted by Satan, and that the only valuable world is the world of heaven where God is still in charge. But idealism is the extreme version of this, where it actually says the world is an illusion. And so no thing matters. And the values system that derives from that is one of not placing a great deal of importance on issues of of suffering, because they say, well, it's just suffering can only be overcome by internally by devoting ourselves to spirituality. It's an illusion anyway, and it really doesn't matter that much. And there are real philosophies that have influence on whole cultures that actually believe that. But neither of these is the view of Tantra. So what is the view of Tantra? I've always wanted to put this on a t-shirt, and I just actually discovered the other day that somebody already did it. Everything matters. This, in some ways, sums up the philosophy of Tantra, certainly the worldview. It's not that we would say that, the material things in the world are what is ultimately important, but everything has its place. Everything is here for a reason. Everyone is here for a reason, whether that one is an ant or a saint. And this really is the worldview of Tantra, and it has enormous implications. And because what is implies that we should love everybody, that we should love all things and all living things and all people, and live our lives accordingly. So the values system that is derived from this is completely different than the value system that you might derive from this idea that nothing matters, or that only matter matters. All right, importance of perspective. A couple of little. These are. I was browsing, if you like, what people think about perspective, and I love this one from Carl Jung. Of course, Carl Gustav Jung was the great Swiss, one of the fathers of psychology, modern psychology. He was actually a student of Freud, but they had their paths parted. They had some fundamental disagreements, and Jung came. He was younger, but he became a really enormous influence on psychology, and still is today through his writings and teachings. And by the way, he studied deeply the philosophies of Buddhism and yoga and Eastern mysticism, amongst a lot of other things. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Anyone ever noticed that in themselves? There's a saying that when you point at somebody, 3 fingers are pointing at you, or maybe 4, depending what you're doing with your thumb. 3 fingers are pointing at yourself, and only 1 is pointing at the other person. So when we find fault in another person, the reason we can understand it, the reason that our perspective is such that we can understand it is because we have it in ourselves. We recognize it. It's familiar. And this, of course, is you know pretty important if we want to develop self-awareness and develop good relationships and treat other people well. So I think this is a very insightful one. Here's another one, very different, from a very different kind of person, somebody who could have used a little psychological help himself, perhaps. But nevertheless, a brilliant man, Steve Jobs. The heaviness of being successful was replaced. This is, of course, talking about when he was ousted from his own company, Apple, that he founded. And they kicked him out of the company. He was fired from the company that he had built, and he had become enormously rich, world famous, successful, and they kicked him out. And he came back later and revived the company. But at this point, he said, the heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. I love that. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. Many people would have taken this apparent defeat very differently. But he went on to actually even greater heights, and that was what led to, to a great extent, to Pixar, and Next, which was the company that created the software that's the basis of Apple's next, the next generation of Apple computers. So, he went on, and then literally the most creative period of his life, or one of them. So I think that's really a neat example of how, he could have taken that in a completely different way, become, bitter, and then kind of done not much with his life because he was discouraged or whatever, but not at all. His ambition prevailed, or whatever it was. His creativity, I like to think, his creative urge prevailed. Okay, we're going to enjoy a little music here. Okay, I had a very nice conversation about time with someone the other day. They asked me whether I think we have free will. I want to ask you, does anyone, what's your opinion? Do you think we have free will, or are we ultimately controlled by destiny of some kind, or some cosmic being that has all power, omnipotent, and we have no choices? Yeah, use your mic. Tell us if you have something to say about it. This is something many people wonder about and have wondered about.
I think we're like a tree. And the very strong part is not free will. That's the part God, or whatever that is, controls us.
Mm-hmm.
And we might be like the leaves, and we've got a little bit of wave and a little bit of ability to do stuff, but that's it.
Okay, so we have free will, but it's in limited quantity. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. That's what I believe, anyway.
That's nice. Okay. Everyone's got an opinion on this one. Yes, we have free will. We have both. Okay, Harry. I'm actually probably in your camp. Don't know, but I base my direction on the belief in free will. I think that's very sound. Sudama, you're convinced you have free will? Very good. That's actually what we need to believe. Whether it's true or not is another question. We have free will, but are often bound by our habits from exercising. Well, yeah, that's makes it difficult. It's a very complicated question. It's not actually my point, but it's related to the nature of time. So I got into this conversation about the nature of time with one of my students, and it was a lot of fun. And I remembered this definition of time that Anandamurti came up with. He said, time is the mental measurement of the motivity of action. In other words, it's a subjective experience. He's effectively saying that what we think of as an external phenomenon is merely our way of experiencing reality, because the capacity of our minds to apprehend reality is limited. From a cosmic perspective, time is simply another dimension, which one can move in freely. We do not have that power. I wouldn't. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the time and space being mental constructs, but I think that, well, our concept of them is a mental constructs. Absolutely. I'm not saying that reality is not there. It's just that we can only understand it by moving through time in one direction. It's perhaps better explained by Winnie the Pooh. I think I quoted him to you before. He says that time is there so that everything doesn't happen all at once, which I think is a really good way of explaining what's going on from a bear of very little brain. So I just want to ask you to do a little exercise with me. And to do that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. How do I do that? I push this button. That's right. Okay. And we're going to listen. I want you to just sit straight and close your eyes for a minute. And we're going to do a little time. We're going to enter a little time capsule, all right? So just make yourselves comfortable. Close your eyes. I can play some music in the background. Lovely piece of music. I'm very fond of this. The musician is a friend of mine. And, oops. And I want you to begin by imagining you're in a very peaceful place, somewhere outdoors in nature. Some hills, some grass, there's some trees in the distance. And you're just walking and there's a light breeze. It's beautiful weather, not too hot. And you see, not far away, you see a kind of a little vehicle, and it looks like a bubble. And it's just sitting there and it's empty. And you walk towards it, and it's got an entry, and it's like a translucent, semi-transparent, I should say, bubble, but it's got a seat inside. And you think, well, this is very curious. And the doorway is open, and you feel that's very safe. So you go inside and you sit down, and you realize that this is a little time capsule that can take you forward into the future. And you're curious, and you feel that this is a safe vehicle. And it takes off. It drifts up into the air. And it doesn't move so much through space as through time, forward. And you can see the landscape around you changing with the seasons more and more rapidly as the years pass. And you remain the same age. You are not going forward in time, but the world around you is. And then you understand that quite a period has passed, maybe 20 or 30 or 40 years, depending on how old you are, but you realize that you would be old by now, quite old, quite elderly. And the capsule begins to descend, and the world around you slows, the changes slow down, and everything comes to a point of stillness. And you rest in your capsule on the ground, and the door opens, and you step out. And then you see, not far away, an elderly person, and you know that it's you. and they're really quite old. And you walk towards them, and they turn to you, and you're meeting yourself in the future, and your life is near its end, and you're curious. And you greet yourself, and listen as your older self tells you what you think you need to know. And you listen. And you might ask some questions, but mostly you listen. So just take a couple of minutes now to hear the advice and wisdom of your older self. And your older self explains to you that they're not going to tell you any details. They just want to give you some guidelines, because that wouldn't work if they were to tell you what's going to happen. But they seem happy, and that feels like enough, at least. So you listen more intently, because maybe they can tell you something very valuable. And then your older self says that you have to go. Time is up. And they bid you farewell, and you come back to your little time capsule, and you climb in, and your older self waves to you, and the time capsule rises above the ground, and the world begins to go back around you, going backwards through the years and the seasons. And then everything around you becomes almost still again, And your little capsule descends and rests on the ground, and you step out of the opening into the present. Just keep your eyes closed for a moment. And if you can think of one sentence or piece of advice or wisdom, something that you thought was valuable that you might like to share with us from your older, perhaps happier, probably wiser self, why don't you share it with us? You can switch your mic on or write it in the chat. I think I have something.
I guess my older self
Can
said
you
that.
speak up?
Pardon me, Donna?
You're very soft. Can you speak louder?
Oh, yeah. Um, so
You
my
need.
older self told me that accomplishments at the end of life seem more important than happiness, which is fleeting, and contentment and fulfillment at the end of life didn't seem that important, but like accomplishments seemed important. And then the other thing was that the advice was to pay more attention to physical health, because as I get older, I'm noticing I should have paid more attention to physical health.
Sounds like good advice. I have a very simple one. I just got that everything's going to be okay. Oh, this is nice. You've always done your best. My older self seemed very content. That's beautiful, and Sheila. From Sudama. Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, you've been. That reminds me of your Himalayan experience, right?
Yeah. Yes, it does.
Yeah, I thought that's what you might be thinking of. Oh wow, I forgive you and I love you very much. Don't worry, everything will be all right. That's what I like. It's kind of like mine a bit. Yeah, I got this. Everything is going to be okay. Cool. Anything else you want to share, folks? From your wiser self. Don't deprive us of the wisdom. I should give credit for this. This exercise is based on a much longer exercise that I I enjoyed at a Tony Robbins grand event. There were 10,000 people there in a giant Levi Stadium, I think it was, and he yeah, he led this very long, and the setup was really very well done, and he led this long guided time capsule visualization, and yeah, I pinched the idea from Tony Robbins. I hope he's happy.
Don't be so quick to judge others and things in life, because sometimes you'll find yourself in those same positions.
Very true. I love that. This is all very sound advice. This is, yeah, it's real wisdom. Take a deep breath and do what is right for you, and take care of yourself before you take care of others. This can be very true for a lot of people I know, especially women, tend to take care of other people before they think about themselves. and that's not always, you know, it's like in the, think like in the airline where they tell you what to do if there's an emergency. You got to get your own oxygen first before you try and take care of someone else. Otherwise, you won't be able to help them.
Now, is there a tendency to have, like some bias in our intuitive impressions that come, some are very valuable insights, but maybe depending on time, person, and place, we might have, some confirmation bias or some other factors influencing the purity of the insight. I don't know.
Sure, it's very easy to think that you're right. And it's not always quite like that. Great. So we're going to go on and look at something called the overview effect. Oh, we got another one here. Okay. Don't be too hard on yourself. Overworking. My older self had a cane from knee damage due to over-exercising. Okay. Try swimming. I like swimming. Swimming doesn't put any stress on your knees. It's not so convenient always, but it's one of my favorite forms of exercise. But that's not a bad idea. But definitely don't be too hard on yourself. Okay, we're going to look at something called the overview effect. And this is a little bit, I sort of alluded to this when I was talking about Fred Hoyle. But first I want to tell you my experience. So we talked about Lord of the Rings. This is my story of the Lord of the Ents. And that's not me, actually. I just managed to find this picture. He's a wonderful, famous ant nerd. He knows everything about ants. But when I was very new to meditation, I remember I went for a long walk all alone up a pretty big hill. It's actually called a mountain, but it's not that big. You can climb it like in an hour and a half. On the edge of Wellington, where I lived in New Zealand. So I climbed I was climbing this mountain by myself, and there was forest, and I remember stopping for a break because it was kind of steep. And I was sitting on this log, looking at the ground, and I saw a bunch of ants, and these little ants. And New Zealand ants are very friendly. They're small. They don't bite. They're a bit boring actually. They're all black, and there's no red and green ones like they have in Australia. And but they're harmless little ants, and they're running around. And I was thinking, those silly little ants, they have no idea that there's this giant human being looking down at them right now, thinking about them. They're just completely oblivious. And I was thinking about laughing at the little ants and how silly they were. And then suddenly I thought, oh. And I kind of looked up at the sky, and I thought, okay, something or somebody unimaginably bigger than me is looking down on me, and how silly am I? So that was my brilliant realization, or shift in perspective, thinking about ants. Here's a little, what would you call this? This is a shift in place, all right, perspective. That is, it gives us an idea of where we are right now, what's real. called Cosmic Eye. From quark to cosmos is what I call it, but it's I got it. I mean, I've seen it before. There are various versions of this. I think it's really no microvita. So I think this is a really neat idea of perspective, which is of course created by somebody as this beautiful visual, but this is what can happen to people when we actually physically are given just a part of that cosmic perspective. It's called the overview effect. So the overview. Well, first thing is, I of course, uh, well, I like that. I disagree with it. um, so I'll tell you the story of Edgar Mitchell in a moment. But before I do that, I want to address your comments, Suresh. Yeah, there is a version of that video called Powers of Ten. Yeah, whoops, I'm gonna skip that. We've just seen that. Okay. So I want to tell you about Edgar Mitchell. Very interesting. He was an astronaut, American astronaut. I think he was the 11th person to walk on the moon. And he describes the experience here. And I actually can't read the top line because I've got this problem with my visibility of my screen. Wait a second. But so I'm going to guess at it. When you're out, looking at the world from space, you get a people orientation, an intense feeling of dissatisfaction with the state of the world and a compulsion to do something about it. From out there on the moon, international politics looks so petty. You want to grab a politician by the scruff of the neck and drag him 250,000 miles out and say, "Look at that, you son of a bitch." So Edgar Mitchell was a Apollo 14 astronaut, and he has an amazing life. Apart from going to the moon, he came back, and on his journey back from the moon, he was the second engineer. And it was a very long journey. It's 250,000 miles, and it takes about 3 days, I think, in those days. And he was mostly looking out at the stars or at the Earth, and he entered into this state of euphoria and extreme ecstasy and bliss. And to the degree that he was worried about his mental health, because and it remained with him. He came back to the Earth, and he was incredibly high, kind of, he was this engineer, and he'd sort of turned into a hippie, and he didn't know what was happening to him. So he spoke to some of his friends who happened to be anthropologists, and they said, "Don't worry, you're not crazy. This is a known phenomena, and you can read about it here in these yoga scriptures. It's called samadhi." And sure enough, he read the description. He thought, "Yeah, that's it. That's what's happening to me." Samadhi is a spiritual trance. It's described in many spiritual scriptures. And he gained a fascination, of course. Then he became really interested in spiritual philosophy. He started reading about Vedanta and non-dualism, and looking at all of these kind of writings. And he actually co-founded an organization called the Institute of Noetic Sciences, I think it's called, and it's a kind of philosophical, spiritual organization. They have conferences and look at the commonality between science and spirituality and that. But more importantly, he helped to found a society of cosmonauts and astronauts. So at that time, there were only Russian and American space travelers. They got together, many of them, and they formed this kind of a lobbying group. And they put pressure on their own governments to declare space a zone of peace. And they actually were instrumental in preventing the militarization of space, which could have led to nuclear war. So his spiritual experience initiated that. And for me, this is, one of the greatest illustrations of the power of perspective. The perspective that he experienced in real time in that space capsule induced this amazing, euphoric spiritual experience that carried on for a long time and led him to his journey of exploration of the wisdom, knowledge from the Orient, what he viewed as the Orient. And that led him on this journey to, founding an organization that was instrumental in preserving world peace preventing, I would say, it hasn't exactly preserved world peace, but it very likely prevented nuclear war and certainly prevented the militarization of space, which is essential to the maintaining basically maintaining life on Earth, in my opinion. So I think that's a really neat note to end on. There's actually more to this presentation, but we ran out of time. And I've found so much content on this, and there's a whole world of this, and there's even a saying that kind of perspective is everything. There is one thing I want to end with, and that is, I'm going to paraphrase this. It's from a philosopher, and he says that actually spiritual practice, what spiritual practice is all about is shifting your perspective. That's what we're doing in meditation. So remember that. And I think it's time to bid farewell for one more week. I look forward to seeing you all, and I'm going to stop sharing this and we can say bye-bye for the next few days.